proper motion to substitute and conform to House Bill 2266. Is there objection? Without objection, you're on House Bill 2266. Senator Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. There's a committee amendment that makes the bill. I'll yield to Vice Chairman Briggs.
We need a motion for passage.
Senator Johnson moves passage, properly seconded. Amendments, Mr. Clerk.
Amendment number 1, Senate State and Local Government Committee amendment is in the House bill.
Chairman Briggs.
Move to withdraw.
Without objection, withdrawn. Thank you. Senator Johnson. Next amendment, Mr. Clerk.
Amendment number 2, filed timely by Senator Gilmore.
Senator Gilmore, you're recognized in the well.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and to the sponsor and to my colleagues. I move the adoption of my amendment, which will completely remove Nathan Bedford Forrest Day, which is July 13, as a day of special observation in this state. This day honors a Confederate general and early Ku Klux Klan leader. He slaughtered and massacred over 200 black soldiers that had surrendered. I ask that you support my amendment to simply remove this disgraceful day so that we do not have to honor him. Nathan Bedford Forrest not only supported the institution of slavery, but he slaughtered surrendered black soldiers. And it's documented that he was the first Grand Wizard of the Ku Klux Klan who terrorized black people. Colleagues, I just asked you how you would feel if you had to walk by a figure that occupies such a prominent position in this Capitol halls as well as the state. We heard the preacher say today, what does the Lord require of you? To act justly, to love mercy, and to walk humbly with your God. During these turbulent times and unrest in America, it's important for our state, Tennessee, to demonstrate a commitment to removing these signs of systemic racism. I ask that if you would support my amendment.
That's a proper motion. Is there a second? Properly seconded. Discussion. Chairman Ackberry.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you, Senator Gilmore, for bringing this amendment. Members, since I've been in the General Assembly, I think Nathan Bedford Forrest and his legacy has been a point of contention, whether I was in the House or currently now in the Senate. And like Senator Gilmore said, and I really want you all to search your hearts, not just your minds, but your hearts. And I want you to think about what it feels like for the hundreds of thousands of African Americans in this state, they themselves descendants of enslaved people. When I try and go back and look at my family tree, I stop past my great-grandfather because of the cruel effects of slavery. There is no record of my family. Now, I know that we have at least said we've moved past these days. We've moved past the legacy of Jim Crow. But I think the last couple of weeks have shown that systemic racism still does exist. And I think that for us as members of this esteemed body, taking this step, removing this symbol, this day of celebration, and I'm not talking about erasing history. We cannot change what happened. We cannot change what will happen. We can change what will happen, rather. We can honor, we can observe, we can not have this type of day and still not erase the legacy of Nathan Bedford Forrest. I want you to think about what it feels like for me as an African American woman to know that our state celebrates someone who not only made his fortune, and that is well established, it is not up for debate, made his fortune on the selling of bodies, selling black folks like we were tractors. We were considered 3/5 a person. I want y'all to understand what that means and what that feels like to then have someone like that be honored by this state, for this state to feel that it's important enough to honor this man for that. And then the massacre at Fort Pillow, surrendering soldiers, those that put their lives on the line. There's no honor in that. That should not be honored. And again, this is not an insult or an affront to anybody in this body. It's not. You all were not around then. And people will, they love to say, and Speaker Pro Tem Dunn rightfully pointed it out last night in committee in the House. This is something that the Democratic Party did when we were in the majority. That doesn't make it right. I think we have an opportunity now to change it, to correct it. You can still remember and know what Nathan Bedford Forrest did without celebrating that day. And I urge you all to please take this step forward in healing and reconciliation and removing the celebration of a known slave trader, a known grand wizard of the Ku Klux Klan. I don't have to tell you all the legacy of that organization and the truly terroristic acts that occurred, the thousands of bodies that were lynched and burned, the communities that were destroyed. I don't have to tell you all that. You know it. And I want you all to search your heart and just really think about what it means to turn the next page, what it means to be a state that is inclusive and cares about all its members, no matter if they're black, white, brown, yellow, no matter what, purple. I want us to be the Christians that we say we are. I often have to ask myself, what would Jesus do? What would Jesus do? And I want you all to search your hearts and think about that. I say this a lot, and I don't know if you all have heard me say it, but it doesn't matter that you say you're a Christian. It's what you do and your actions. And so I urge you all to please search your hearts, search your minds, and do the right thing on this amendment. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Senator Ackberry. Further discussion? Senator, I see none. Senator Johnson, without objection, we'll allow him to close. Senator Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members, and thank you, Senator Gilmore. We had a very pleasant conversation last evening about this amendment. I appreciate your eloquence and your passion. I do. What I'd like to submit to the body's consideration is this bill has evolved, and I haven't even had a chance, Mr. Speaker, to speak to the bill. I know we're on the amendment, but if I could be indulged to tell a little bit about the bill and that I'm going to ask for you to act on today. The code, Tennessee Code, has for many, many years stipulated that there are a number of days of special observance that are in the code. They range from Mother's Day to Abraham Lincoln Day to Vietnam Veterans Day. There's about 20, and in fact, there's not only some days that are recognized in the code, there are some weeks that are recognized in the code. And the code requires that the governor sign a proclamation on those days to proclaim, on behalf of the chief executive officer of our state, the governor, to proclaim, sign a proclamation in observance of these days. So the conversation with Governor Lee, and by the way, other governors have referenced this as well, is that they felt like it's a violation of separation of powers, if you will, in that the code requires that the governor take his pen out and sign a piece of paper, and if he or she does not do that, they're in violation of state law. And the committee amendment that makes the bill deals with that, and that's what passed out of the committee. And it simply says that the days of special observation that are in there will remain in the code, but that the governor is not required to take his or her pen out and sign a piece of paper. And so it solves that separation of powers issue. And so that's what I would prefer that the body act on today is that bill, and let's get that problem resolved. And while I have tremendous respect for the sponsor of this amendment, I respectfully request that this isn't the vehicle to address that today. And we can have those conversations about the days that are in the code, and maybe some should be in there, maybe some shouldn't be in there, but let's take that up at a different time with a different vehicle. And with that, Mr. Speaker, I would respectfully move Amendment 2 to the table.
That's a proper motion, properly seconded. I'll allow Senator Gilmore to close. Senator Gilmore.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you, Mr. Sponsor, and I appreciate you taking my call and discussing with me in earnest. I would just ask you colleagues again to examine your hearts. We are in very uncharted waters during this time. Over the years, there have been a number of African-American men and young boys that have died at the hands of law enforcement. And as a result, we've seen peaceful riots, we've seen some violence, and we're seeing looting. But the bottom line is that there's a tremendous amount of unrest in this country, and it has to do with the relationships between black and white. And I would just hope that we could all get together, and I hope that this would be a good first step of Tennessee showing that we do not need this symbolic legislation, which is basically what it's doing, because we still will have the observance of this day, the special observance of Nathan Bedford Forrest. So again, I renew my motion and hope you will vote in favor of the motion and against the tabling motion.
Senator Gilmore renews her motion on amendment number 2. Senator Johnson has moved it to the table. We'll be voting on the tabling motion. Those members favoring the tabling motion will vote aye when the bell rings. Those opposed will vote no. Let every member cast their vote when the bell rings.
Senator White votes aye. Senator Pody votes aye. Senator Rose votes aye. Senator Reeves votes aye. Senator Powers votes aye. Senator Nicely votes aye. Senator Lundberg votes no. Senator Gilmore votes no. Senator Kyle votes no. Senator Gardenhire votes aye. Senator Robinson votes no. Senator Briggs votes no. Senator Hensley votes aye.
Mr. Clerk, take the roll.
Ayes 20, 9 nays.
The tabling motion prevails. We're back on the bill. Is there discussion? Senator Yarborough. Leader Yarborough.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I just want to rise briefly to address a couple of things about the sponsor's description of this bill as not the right vehicle for this amendment. This bill, as it was originally filed, did exactly what Senator Gilmore's amendment tried to do. As filed by the sponsor, this bill would have eliminated the Nathan Bedford Forrest holiday in Tennessee. I don't understand, and no explanation has been given as to why there's been a retreat from that commitment, that short attempt at leadership on this issue. Instead, we've been given a change that this is about separation of powers. Every law in that green book is this body requiring the governor to execute laws. That's his job. And so we have taken something that started as an attempt to remove a stain on the state that the governor himself felt. Because after the first time he put out this proclamation, it was an uproar around the country. That even, I think Senator Ted Cruz even criticized this as something that was deeply objectionable. And so when we started this session, the governor was trying to fix that. And now it's been explained away as though we just were trying to deal with a separation of powers issue. Is it an urgent matter that meets the criteria that we've had during this whole time to have something to make sure that the governor doesn't have to do a proclamation for Mother's Day? I mean, Mr. Speaker, I think we all know that this General Assembly and the governor are avoiding confronting this very particular issue of whether we're going to continue celebrating the legacy of Nathan Bedford Forrest with a state holiday. And it's disappointing that we've retreated in this way. And it's disappointing that we're not being straightforward in this. If there's a desire to continue celebrating someone who I think Senator Gilmore and Senator Agberry were as articulate as could be on this, but if there's a desire to continue celebrating this man who was a slave trader, who was the commanding officer at Fort Pillow, who was associated with the Ku Klux Klan, and who very publicly threatened members of this body, the members of this body who ratified the 13th Amendment abolishing slavery, the members of this body who ratified the 14th Amendment guaranteeing equal access to justice. Those were people. You can go upstairs in the library in the Cordell Hull building and read the contemporaneous records that demonstrate the manner in which this person was threatening people who were trying to move forward on race. And he led an armed resistance. If we're going to do this, we shouldn't hide behind separation of powers. We should be honest about what we're doing. Because what we're doing today in passing this and in failing to deal with the legacy of this building, this Capitol, this government, it's wrong. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Leader Yarborough. Further discussion? I see none. Senator Johnson renews his motion. We'll be voting on House Bill 2266 as amended on third and final consideration. Those members in favor of House Bill 2266 as amended will vote aye when the bell rings. Those opposed will vote no. Let every member cast their vote when the bell rings.
Senator White votes aye. Senator Pody votes no. Senator Rose votes aye. Senator Reeves votes aye. Senator Powers votes aye. Senator Nicely votes aye. Senator Lundberg votes aye. Senator Kyle votes no. Senator Gilmore votes no. Senator Gardenhire votes aye. Senator Briggs votes aye. Senator Robinson votes no.
Mr. Clerk, take the roll.
Ayes 22, 6 nays.
House Bill 2266 as amended has received a constitutional majority. I declare it passed. Without objection, the motion to reconsider is hereby tabled. Next bill.